Okay, good morning. This is day 119 of making little videos that describe a day, a thought, in the life of Schizophrenic Dominic. I experience schizophrenia, but I do not believe that it is a disease or that I am crazy in my mind. I believe the world went crazy on me and warred upon me, and that it is a reality to be experienced. I have written in a book on medium.com that is I offer for uh, free. It needs to be edited. It's not necessarily the best, but I think it's ample enough to share with people, and it's imperative that it be shared at this moment in time. And so I share it there for free. I have expressed on day 17 of these videos why I call myself a schizophrenic rather than targeted individual, and I express in day 45 why I make these videos in like a 3-minute intro. And so, yeah. All right. I say little things every day to talk about synchronicity and feedback that I get from the public and through time and government and stuff. And so I was going to talk about a few things today. I probably won't get to a lot of the stuff, but I was going to start off with the Stephen Greer book that I'm reading called Unacknowledged. And it's all about the UFO phenomena and alien ET contact and what is supposedly real and what we don't acknowledge on in society or through the media, I guess, basically, because there are people in society acknowledging it, but not in the media. And all right, so I was learning a little bit today out of this book, and I was going to read something in here that is a description from a Professor Herman Oberth. He passed away in 1989. And he says, "It is my thesis that flying saucers are real and that they are spaceships from another solar system. I think that they possibly are manned by intelligent observers who are members of a race that may have been investigating our Earth for centuries. I think that they possibly have been sent out to conduct systematic long-range investigations, first of men, animals, vegetation, and more recently of atomic centers, armaments, and centers of armament production. This guy was a German rocket expert and founding father of the space age. Flying saucers come from a distant world. Is the article in the American Weekly, October 24th, 1954. And so, yeah, so I just was going to read that, express that, give that as a demonstration of a professor who was talking about this back in the 1950s. And he thinks that flying saucers had been coming for centuries. And so, what knowledge do people have? And then you have to ask, are they throwing you off the tail? Because, like, is it some other people say that it's these things are time travel machines and stuff like that. And so you don't know what's the truth or whatever. But I just thought that was interesting. And uh, Stephen Greer goes on to talk about in the next couple pages about Foo Fighters, and the Foo Fighters were UFOs that occurred during sightings that occurred during World War II by American pilots over Germany, and they were like orange balls of light and stuff. And in it, he describes Foo. I think Foo is. I think he said it was French, is a word for fire. And I'm going to talk about a synchronicity here in my books as I'm reading here about fire. And one of the things that was going on the day that I read this, I read it I think yesterday or so, maybe 2 days ago, was that the Savana Banaanas baseball team was playing the Firefighters at in California at Angel Stadium or whatever. And so, okay, it's just that, and he's talking. I read about Foo Fighter here and the fire flame or whatever, and I described that I am subject to people starting fires based on my eating habits and the fires that consumed the uh, homes in LA were potentially started because I ate a bowl of pasta. And I know that sounds crazy or whatever, but that's the schizophrenic reality that you're subject to. Terrorist groups or political groups are monitoring you and playing weird games like that. And so uh, yeah, and they don't always do it. They do it upon random things that I do. It really isn't related to things that I do, but like they will initiate things based on an action that I have, or they will correlate they will it'll correspond to an action I have because that's the instigator of the event. Even though they were planning the event, they were going to do it on whatever action I did. They were just going to try to make me feel like it was my fault. Anyway, so the fire. Then at the same day I was reading that and all that was going on, there was the flamethrower on the Israel demonstrators in Boulder, Colorado. And so that all occurred at the same time that I was reading about Foo Fighters and the Foo being the word for fire. And the same day I was reading that, I was reading out of Fingerprints of the God book, and it was talking about a Berosus. It says from the New York Times, from which the above report is taken, does not attempt to clarify matters further. Its writers are probably unaware that just how much they sound like Berosus, the Chaldean historian, astronomer, and seer of 3rd century BC, who made up deep study of omens he believed would presage the final destruction of the world. He concluded, I, Berosus, interpreter of Belus, affirm that all earth and Harris will be consigned to flame when the 5 planets assemble in Cancer, so arranged in one row that a straight line may pass through their spheres. And so I thought it was interesting that I read about Berosus and the prediction of flame when 5 planets pass through spheres. And yeah, so I was reading out of Fingerprints of the Gods that all that was lining up, talking about fire. At the same time, that guy gave the flamethrower thing on the protesters, or I guess the demonstrators in Boulder, Colorado. And so I thought that was all very much industry. And also, Sundance Film Festival went to Boulder, Colorado. And this passage out of here is about the dance of the earth around the sun. So, everything kind of lines up and there's a synchronicity here. And it's kind of going crazy. And there's some sort of message about it. And I don't know what the message is. And so, there could be a lot of things that the message is, but I tried to decode the messages through time, as I say, but that's why I read out of all these books to get it's a way to the variances and the variety leads to a hidden key, basically informing me or whatever. And so a little bit later, as I was reading those, I was staying up all night and I was reading those and I was thinking about that, and then I walked over. I walked over and I have a mirror over here in the room, and I saw myself in kind of the shadows, and I was like, "Ah, man, you look kind of ugly in that shadow." And then I moved over to the left, and the light reflected in the mirror and shone on my face, and I was like, "Oh, you look a little better like that." So it made me think about like perspective and how light brings about beauty. And so I started thinking like the mirror light reflected, and I was thinking the light is artificial, and so artificiality, the creation, and without creation, the universe is ugly. I was thinking, and it was like, is it really ugly or is it just covered by darkness? And so that made me think about light and dark and like good and evil and just like light and dark and all the potential factors of light and dark are shadows and stuff. And it made me think about creation and like, artificial creation without creating the light. I would have looked ugly in that moment. when the light I looked a little better, So I was like, it was like pretty in the light and it was ugly in the dark. And so that made me think about sunlight and the Sundance and all that and everything being artificial. And so, yeah, so there's some sort of message that I was receiving at that point in time. And I don't know exactly what it is. Change your perspective, and something that's ugly can seem beautiful. And then few a few uh, uh, a few days later, I was listening to classical music while shaving, and I was like, when without the classical music on, and this is something that I frequently do, but without the classical music on, everything kind of seems a little bit mundane or whatever. But you put on that creation, which is, I guess, artificial or is part of the universe, its vibrations, and all of a sudden the creation in your mind and your ear with the synthetic thing that puts in your ear, all of a sudden your life is part of a movie soundtrack, and everything lines up perfectly, and it entertains your mind while you're shaving, and all of a sudden, like, da 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 da, and everything becomes beautiful in that moment because you're listening to some sort of artificial thing in your ear that creates the music or whatever. And so, you know, uh, I don't know. So I started thinking that today. And so those were the things that I was thinking about. And related to the fire, I don't know what the synchronicity was about the fire, but it was all lining up and about Foo Fighters and stuff like that. And then you think Foo Fighters is a band. So yeah. Okay, so speaking of artificial and potentially, there's like brain control going on with sports, as I said in other videos, and how much is the NBA is real and how much of it is artificial. These are the two most average looking teams I've ever seen in an NBA Finals, to be both in the NBA Finals. And I saw video clips where they were showing the guy, they were bouncing the ball off their foot in the key while playing or whatever, and that was a highlight of the teams or whatever. And it just didn't seem, it seems, I don't it that the I thought the Knicks and the Timberwolves were the better teams. Just looking at their quality of players, just eyeball test, they look like the better teams, but eyeball test, doesn't necessarily bring out the games. And so I don't know, but like, uh, these are the two most average looking teams, and they're claiming that this is the end of the super team, and I really doubt that. But you know, they're good teams. They're playoff teams. I think they're playoff teams, but they don't. Uh, they don't strike me as NBA final teams, and so like they're just like skill wise, they seem to be lacking, and everyone loves the finals, but not everyone. Some people are saying it's like a small market, and I guess we'll find out. All right. So I was gonna read a thread. Actually, I can't read it because I don't have it, but I can say it. Uh, I've kind of struck by, it's what kind of a weird civilization should we live in when corporations play such a major role in deciding, or like business success even, or financial success plays such a major role in deciding who gets to reproduce and who gets to have health care and life and death health care and life and non-life reproduction. And this seems to be po- possible because of the advent of birth control and the simultaneous rise of fascism, even though fascism was kind of like pro natalist or whatever, but like, you know, maybe it was a multifaceted thing or whatever. And so and it strikes me that like you know, people started making choices about whether or not they would reproduce, and that was based on financial abilities. And then at the same time, there's this corporate fascism rise, which limits people's financial capabilities and keeps hands in the small hands of few people at the top. And it's kind of a weird civilization to live in when that happens. And so that's something that I thought the other day. And then at the same time, I said that, you know, it's like the corporation decides who gets to advance, who gets cut, and who gets hired. And it has such a bearing on life giving abilities in society or whatever. And so, yeah. All right, I got to stop here. And then they control governments and all that. And so, all right, I got to stop here. And thank you for listening to me. Goodbye.